So, in our most recent segment, I think we were talking about in the McDonough's Hammer of Truth. Tom was talking about abandoned places, and this is kind of actually a reshoot because we did this whole extensive section on abandoned places we'd been to and abandoned places we'd like to go to, and then it turned out the phone wasn't recording. But I have proof that the computer is recording at this moment. So, obviously, as horror writers, Chuck and I are horror writers. Tom is a horror aficionado. We're into abandoned places, right? That just speaks to us and things like that. So, let's talk about here. We've all been to certain, some of us may have been to abandoned places before. So, what I would like to talk about here is what abandoned places have you been to? Or what abandoned places would you like to go to? Why don't we start out with Chuck first? Chuck, have you been into any abandoned places that really speak to your horror soul, or is there an abandoned place you would love to go to?
Yeah, so I grew up in the middle of nowhere, out in the woods, where your neighbors are all like a third of a mile away, and it's trees in between. So a lot of stuff that's a horror trope was normal to me growing up there. We had woods all around us. I would just, even as a little kid, I would just wander the woods at night. I didn't care. We also had an old, dilapidated barn. And when I say dilapidated, I mean like the roof had caved in and everything. So that stuff for me, I would just wander to it as a 3 or 4-year-old at night if I snuck out of the house. And it's good. It's all cool. Cemeteries never bother me. I have been to a number of places that are abandoned. I'm trying to think. A lot of it's just kind of it's just fun to be in, cemeteries and at night and stuff like that. But there is one I definitely want to explore. I want to go into and be inside, and that is the abandoned asylum in Binghamton, the Castle on the Hill, or the classic asylums from the mid 19th century. That kind of was part of that early revival, not a revival, that early movement of how to care for the inebriated, which is why it's called the inebriate asylum, and also those with other disorders.
Is that perfect for us? I mean, that's what it was meant for.
Yes, and well, I plan on writing a story that incorporates its history and stuff like that as well. I would love to go inside and explore it. I actually have a friend who got to get a tour of it. It's very difficult to get access to that building, and I've taken some pictures on the outside, but then I was kicked out. I was told, please don't take pictures here. So I would love to explore that. Haunted places, stuff like that as well. I would love to, take tours. A lot of that doesn't bother me like it does a lot of other people. It's just kind of like, okay, that's a weird sound. That was kind of cool. That'll go into a story at some point. But I love exploring abandoned places. But a lot of stuff that I consider abandoned places, or other people consider abandoned places, I just call the woods and things like that. I grew up around it.
Tom.
Well, I like that Chuck brought that up because I actually drove around what we call the Castle on the Hill here, the asylum, inebriate asylum as they call it, because there's more than just that one building. There's several, and especially in, we'll say February, not right now, with the whole snow and windswept area, it's pretty nerve-wracking. However, when I was a junior in college, I got an internship down in Washington, the National Archives. And now, unfortunately, I went down there when it was a bad time to be an intern in Washington. I'm talking about the Bill Clinton era. Don't you say a word, I will punch you in the face, Kevin, right now.
Do you have a dress, Tom, that has some stains on it? Is that what you're saying?
Shut up. My own man was worse. No, actually, when I was down there, since I'm a big Civil War fan, traveling through Virginia, going to several battlefields, there were a few that I went to that were extremely creepy. The first being, it's both Chancellorsville and the Wilderness. It's a very heavily wooded area, but unlike up here in New York State, the overgrowth is very dense. So it is very scary to walk along these very small paths, and you see the old redoubts and we'll say trench areas that the soldiers dug. They are still there, by the way. We're talking from the Civil War era. and also Spotsylvania Courthouse. And I went there when it was an off season. And Spotsylvania is nowhere near as popular as Gettysburg, so they don't get a lot of, we'll say, tourists. I started one area and walked all the way around to another part, and while basically walking in a circle, walking back to my car, it was getting dark. I didn't have a flashlight, and we didn't have iPhones back then. So it was getting super dark, and just walking along the road, it sounded like feet marching and stuff like that. So that was extremely creepy for me. However, bringing up what Chuck said as well, I'll have to look into, since we have the time now, see if we can get a little bit of a tour into the Binghamton Inebriate Asylum, as it's called. And for those of you who are watching this, it meant essentially a drying out for drunks, if you will. That's not us. We're not that far along. But it is a extremely creepy area. If you ever seen it, it is a very scary area. Kevin.
So there's, and I have to caution, at this point, the one area that I'm going to mention has been bought, and it is currently trespassing if you go there. Probably one of the first abandoned places that I ended up going to. First of all, I love them. Like Chuck said, I've been in my fair share of abandoned barns. You know, actually, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. When I was like 14 years old, I don't know how I found out about this, but my grandmother lived in Pennsylvania, down in Elk Lake, and down the road from her house was this burnt out foundation of a house. And back then, I wasn't a horror fan. I didn't think about ghosts or anything like that. But for some reason, I always went to that burnt out foundation. I don't know what it was about it that it called to me. The idea that this used to be a house and people lived here and now they don't. So that was actually the first thing I ever went to. But I've always liked, visiting places like that. But not too long ago, there is an old elementary school on Route 79. It was Shenango Forks Elementary School that was basically abandoned. It was basically closed down because the enrollment had shrunk, so they were consolidating schools. And it had been sitting there on Route 79 forever. And I'll probably put some pictures in the post-production here. But I have been driving by that forever. And I thought to myself, I really need to stop there one day. And on a whim, I stopped. And it was almost something out of a fantasy novel. The front doors were completely covered by these huge, they weren't trees, but they weren't bushes. Like they were kind of in the middle. They were these big flowering plants that were like, not really trees, but they weren't low shrubbery. So it covered the entire front door. But if you ducked under them, there is this clear space, and the door was wide open. And you could not see that from the road. So I went inside, and I was careful. I didn't go downstairs. I didn't go anywhere as it was dark. But especially, I think it probably impacted me more as being a teacher. Tom, I don't know how you felt about this, but I've always felt at the end of the school year, when everything's graded, everything's done, and we're there for the last couple days, I've always felt the school just feels wrong when it's empty. It's supposed to be full of kids, right? And you're in this.
There's actually I'm trying to find it, but there's actually a term for that, for the phobia or the weird feeling you get from places that are supposed to be populated,
right?
And they're not. There's a term for it.
And I think probably as teachers we know that, because Tom and I mean, our day is filled with students being great, students being stupid, students being dorky, their student drama. A school building is supposed to be full of drama. And those last couple days of school, when they're of our school, and there's no one there, is really weird. So to be walking around an abandoned school where there's desks tipped over in classrooms and graffiti on classroom walls, it was really weird. But when
Well,
I
actually, I mentioned that the school thing. I completely get you guys. I have family who work in schools. My father, my grandmother used to work in the school. So I've wandered to the school in the summer. I've wandered at the end of the school year. Same thing, and I completely agree. There's a weird feeling when it just vacates and there's nothing left.
When I got to the gym, though, the gym was really cool because it was very apparent. The gym was full of graffiti. But I didn't think it was disrespectful graffiti. I mean, this is like, I'm one of those folks that feels like some graffiti verges on folk art. I mean, this is really, really impressive. And it was very clear. There was graffiti. So this school is in Shenango Forks, and a lot of people who are watching this, if you're not from the Binghamton area, don't. But this school was in Shenango Forks, and it had graffiti from school districts at least 2 or 3 hours away. Like graffiti from Newark Valley, graffiti from Whitney Point, graffiti from Binghamton, graffiti, all these. So it became very clear that kids from all over were coming to this abandoned gym. And I thought that was just cool. I really did. And in fact, it actually inspired a story where I wrote about that. So it was really, really, really cool. The other abandoned place, Tom, you and I have both been to. Chuck has been to Golden Valley Sports Camp. Way back in the day, there was a basketball camp. There was an outdoor camp where you stayed in cabins, and all the camps were blacktop. And I spent honestly, from 7th grade through 10th grade, I was a camper. From 11th grade through my sophomore year, I was a counselor. So I spent a huge chunk of my life, and when I was a counselor, I was there all summer, all 5 weeks. So I spent a huge chunk of my life at this basketball camp. When I discovered it was abandoned, I've been there several times. It's almost become a ritual, an annual. My daughter and I go there, and Tom and I went there once too. And again, it has a very weird, abandoned feel to it. Like, especially the very first time I went. I went by myself the very first time. Nobody else came with me. Everyone else who came... What's that?
It's creepy.
Well, Tom, it was even creepier when I went, because everyone else who's come with me since, it's very clear that somebody has cleaned up the place because they're trying to sell it. When I went there, it literally looked like people had walked out the day before. Like, stuff was left everywhere. Like toys, craft projects, things like suntan lotion, like med kits. It was like everyone had stepped up and walked out, and I had walked in the next day. So, and that's still there, and I probably will go there again this August. It's become kind of my...
Scarecrow?
What's
Remember
that?
The scarecrow we saw there?
There's a weird...
Scarecrow.
Again, I'll find this picture and put it in post-production. There's a weird scarecrow there that somebody put up with like a soccer ball and a jersey, and you're just like, okay, how many dozens of horror movies have started with this?